after being so reticent yourself to speak about any of this publicly and holding it within you for pretty much half a century, 50 years, what made you want to come out in this way on this topic now?
Yeah, I don't think I didn't. I felt like I didn't have a choice. I think that's part of the problem. Holding it in for I'm 55. My dad died when I was 10, and I don't think I spoke about him very much of my life because it was so painful. And the death of my brother, the death of my nanny from Alzheimer's, who was a mother figure to me. So those were things I kept. I mean, they changed the course of my life. They changed the person that I started out being, and yet, like so many people, I found it hard to talk about without. It just seemed so overwhelming that to even broach it would be cataclysmic. And as I started going through my mom's things after she died 3 years ago, as you said, at the grand old age of 95. I felt very alone in that process, and I realized, and I started recording it. Making recordings on my phone just to talk it's something I do. I just narrate it like a correspondent does. It helps me through things. It's something I read Viktor Frankl did in his book Man's Search for Meaning. He talks about doing that in concentration camps, of sort of narrating himself through experiences to kind of have a distance from it and be able to kind of understand it. And I started doing that, and I didn't think to make it a podcast. It was just something for me. But then I realized this is this universal thing. Everybody will go through the things of their parents or their loved ones who have died. And I didn't really see anything out there about it. No one really talks about it. And I just decided to kind of put it out there. And I've been really just stunned by the response.
So I'm going to get into that in a moment. But you just raised the concept of a correspondent recording experiences and trying to deal like that. And I also was, quite moved to find that, when you were much younger, you actually went to the war zones, and we met in many of them, Somalia, Bosnia, wherever. But that was almost as a weapon to try to protect yourself against, or to run away from, I guess, these feelings.
I think it was actually to run toward. I couldn't talk about these things, but I wanted to surround myself. I wanted to be places where the pain I was feeling inside was matched. Sorry, it's emotional. Talked about the pain I was feeling inside was matched by the pain outside, and I felt I understood some of these places. I mean, not to compare my little emotions with what was happening in Sarajevo or Somalia or Rwanda or anywhere, but I understood. I wanted to be around places. I wanted to be in places where the language of loss was spoken, and I wanted to learn from others how they survived, because I wanted to know how I would survive.
And it is really, it's really profound. And what I want to do, actually, before asking you another question, is play a soundbite of your mother, Gloria Vanderbilt, who had lost her husband, who had lost her son to suicide, who was actually there when your brother actually took his own life, and we can talk about it afterwards. But she told Larry King in 1996 about the process, about the process when a grieving caller phoned in.
I think if you can just go over it again and again and again, and this is the image that I used of breaking through the glass bubble, because I used to be really a very reserved person that didn't show my feelings. And when Carter Cooper died, it was like breaking through this thing and communicating with everybody in the world, because we are all connected.
That's amazing. Did she talk to you about all of that at that time?
Absolutely. My mom had experienced great losses throughout her life, and that really shaped the course of her life from the time she was a little child. She was removed from the custody of her mother and her beloved nanny by the courts in New York in a famous custody battle at the height of the Depression. And so she spent her life replaying and rethinking and coming to try to understand the losses she had experienced. And so she was able to talk about it with me. I just wasn't really, and I was able to listen, but she would try to keep my father's name alive in our house. She would tell stories about him. For me, it was so painful. It was like the third rail. It was something I couldn't touch. So I would listen, but I couldn't really break out of myself to toward the end of her life, she and I had very deep conversations, and we connected, and we had nothing left unsaid between us by the time. But when I was young, it was particularly hard for me.
And it is unbelievable, really. It's hard to imagine what you felt. Your father died of a heart disease when you were 10, but you say in the podcast that you weren't even allowed really to visit him in the hospital. Children weren't allowed in the ICU, and then your brother, when you were 21, he was 23, leapt from the 14th floor apartment of the building, and your mother was there when it happened.
Yeah.
You're now
processing,
and tried to stop him. Was she able to process it herself?
That word process, I don't, it's a word we hear a lot. I'm not exactly sure what it means. I mean, she relived it constantly. She replayed it in her head every single day of her life for the rest of her life. And she never, I mean, it is one of the terrible things about suicide for anybody out there who's experienced the death of a loved one through suicide. There's the questions of why did somebody do this, and did they even know why they were doing it? And the feelings of, one of the things about suicide is it's difficult to remember the way somebody lived their life. You're left with remembering very much and stuck in your mind how they ended their life. And I had this conversation in the podcast with a guy named B.J. Miller, who also lost his sister to suicide. You end up kind of, at least in my case, wondering, did I even really know my brother? Because I didn't know he was going to do this. And if I didn't know that, how did I even know really who he was? But my mom, until the day she died, she would out of the blue say to me, maybe if I had, grabbed an iron from the fireplace and hit, Carter, it would have knocked him out, and maybe that would have stopped him. I could have stopped him and from going to the balcony. And so she could never get to a place where she could accept the death, but she got to a place where she could continue to live. And, you and I have spent our lives going to places and asking questions and trying to understand why things happen. And for me, part of that has been to come to a place, and, you were famously, your coverage in Bosnia, you can ask somebody why, the whys of things till you're blue in the face. And some things, no answer they give is going to make sense of why somebody is committing genocide or why somebody is committing great brutality to another. And sometimes you have to get to a place where you can live without a why. Yeah. And that's the way it is, I think, for me, at least, in the wake of my brother's suicide, getting to a place where I could live in a world where sometimes there isn't a why.
Wow, that is really an important thing you just said, really, because everybody wants answers to their questions, but sometimes there just aren't. You have also experienced an amount of, I laughed and cried through this. So did you. There were interviews that you did with some of your guests on this podcast that also had, the wry side, the human, sometimes humorous side, and particularly with Stephen Colbert, who experienced also an unspeakable tragedy when he was little. He lost his father and two brothers in a plane crash. You talked to them, but you also love this quote by J.R. Tolkien that he brought up to you, and it was also very, very profound. Do you know which one I mean?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah. You tell me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Tolkien wrote in a letter, and Stephen Colbert told me about this 3 years ago when I first talked to him, right after my mom died. And Tolkien wrote to somebody saying, "What of God's punishments are not gifts, or what punishment of God is not a gift?" And when I read that, I was stunned by it. I read that Stephen had said that, and I'm still stunned by it. This idea that you can become grateful for the thing you most wish had never happened, and how can you get to that place, and can you really get to that place, and what does that even mean to be grateful for the worst thing that has ever happened to you? And what Stephen will say and does say, and I've come closer to that since then. Is it's not that you wanted this thing to happen or that you ever wish it happened, but it has made you the person you are. And if you want to be the most human being you can be, you have to experience loss. You have to be grateful for everything. You can't just pick and choose what you're grateful for. If you want to be a human. And this is something that we all go through this, and it makes you, and what you're grateful for not is the death of your loved one, but for what it is, the opportunity that it gives you to break through what my mom called that ceiling or that bubble, or to be connected to everybody around you, and to understand that vulnerability and connect with people on the most basic, deepest level. And that is what grief has done for me. That is what the deaths of my father and brother and mother and nanny have done for me. They've allowed me, though it's difficult for me still, but they have allowed me to connect with people in the darkest of moments in their life.
It really is remarkable. It's great to talk to you. The series is incredible, and really, it's just amazing that you did it. Thank you, Anderson.
Thank you, Christiane.